11 Washington government agencies mishandled over $1 billion in COVID funds. The segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. We've talked a lot on the show about audits. You know, there have been some demands for audits of programs that absolutely need them. The Housing Justice Project, the Restorative Pathways program that's supposed to be helping juvenile offenders get on a better track, but it's absolutely failing at that. And look, I don't understand why audits become so political and controversial. It's like, no, this is our money. You know, it's going to programs that we're supporting, some of us. And we would like to know that the money is being used well. What is controversial about this? And every time somebody demands an audit, it's like a Republican. Why don't Democrats demand audits? Especially the homeless one really bothers me too. You know, you look at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority spending hundreds of millions of dollars only for homelessness to increase 23% year over year. If you cared about the homeless people, truly cared about them, wouldn't you be like, hey, we need to audit that. Let's figure out what's working, what's not working. Where's all the money going? Why aren't we having any outcomes for the amount of money that we're putting into this? So it's so weird that audits are like a conservative issue. It's like a Republican issue. Now, I will give the state auditor a lot of credit. State auditor, this is a routine thing that they do, but they came out with this massive audit. It's like 1,500 pages. So, I mean, if you're really nerdy and you want to nerd out on the audit, go ahead and dip into it. But it came out and it found that 11 Washington government agencies mishandled over $1 billion in federal funds that came in as a result of COVID-19. Again, if you want to read the full audit, I'll even acknowledge that I did not read the full audit. But this was an audit for a period from July 2022 through July 30th, 2023. So kind of tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic and the money that was coming in. I just picked out 3 of many, many things that they found that had been mishandled. The Employment Security Department made improper payments to ineligible beneficiaries of the unemployment insurance program. The Department of Children, Youth, and Families did not have adequate internal controls over and did not comply with requirements to ensure payments to child care providers paid with temporary assistance for needy family funds. The Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction did not have adequate internal controls over and did not comply with federal reporting requirements for the Education Stabilization Fund program. So we had all this federal money coming in, a ton of it, and more than $1 billion of it either can't be accounted for. Like there isn't proper accounting to even figure out if money that went out should have gone out to who it went out to, which is very problematic. Or you had these failures of internal controls to make sure that these agencies, from the Office of Superintendent to the Department of Children, Youth, and Families to the Employment Security Department, that there was like no internal protocols to make sure that they had clear standards in place for where the money was going, that the money was tracked so that when an audit happened, they would have all this in place. So our friends over at the Center Square did a good detailed article on this, reaching out to some of the agencies and the state auditor's office to get some context. It says a new report from the Washington State Auditor's Office found a record 86 issues with how 11 state agencies spent federal COVID-19 aid, noting documentation deficiencies and $1.17 billion in questioned costs in the fiscal year 2023. And again, that's just 1 year. And when they say questioned costs, so some of it, it's important to know, they can't definitively prove it was misspent, but the record keeping is so bad that they can't prove it was spent well either, which is just as disturbing to me. It says the audit specifically looked at federal money being spent by the Washington government, which in the last fiscal year totaled over $29 billion. So $29 billion of that $1.2 billion kind of unaccounted for. It says Jim Brownell, Assistant Director of State Audit and Special Investigations at the Auditor's Office, pointed to the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families, which had over $350 million flagged in the recent audit, which honestly doesn't surprise me. How big of a disaster has DCYF been? We've talked about so many issues with that agency. So the fact that that agency alone had over $350 million flagged as potentially problematic, that doesn't come as a surprise to me. I'm glad that the audit has it in black and white. It says, according to Brownell, the flagged spending was due to the issues with the department's accounting for child care payments. Auditors could not gather enough evidence to assess whether the payments were made appropriately, were appropriately accounted for, or materially complied with federal requirements. He said, so in this particular case, DCYF accounting was not up to standard, and we could not trace $350 million back to individual payments. They do high-level accounting adjustments. They move big batches of expenditures from one funding source to another, and we're just not able to audit them. It is problematic when the state auditor is unable to properly audit state agencies because their record keeping and their protocols are so bad that they cannot tell the state auditor's office where the money went and to whom and how much. That's crazy stuff. And then you have this government that has become more and more bloated over the last 10 years in particular. And these audits touch just a fraction of our government spending. Just a fraction. So here they have this audit. Again, it's massive in scope, but it still accounts for only a fraction of the spending that our state government makes. Think of all these other areas that have never seen an audit, that don't see audits to this depth. Think of how much misuse, waste, fraud could be uncovered. I go back to the homelessness system. You cannot tell me that there is not severe waste in the King County Regional Homelessness Authority when you're spending as much money as they're spending and having no results. And then you look at even small things that have popped up over the years where there was never an investigation into it. Like Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin hiring a crime czar? What was it? What was the official name that they gave Andre Taylor? Street czar.
Street czar.
It was a street czar,
Yep.
To connect police to the communities they serve. And this was one of the many, many government contracts handed out after the summer of 2020 in the rioting. Well, Andre Taylor didn't even really show up for work. And then they didn't renew his contract after 6 months because nothing was done and he didn't have anything to show for it. And then they just didn't talk about it really publicly. And it's let's just sweep that one under the rug. And that accounted for not even $1 million, I don't think. But when you look at all these individual examples, the Housing Justice Project, which just wrote a $50,000 check for a guy that has refused to pay rent for 2 years, that was never intended to be the way that money was used, both county funds and state funds. But it's being used that way anyway, and then they're not being audited. It's somehow political to want them audited. So you look at this one audit, $1.17 billion worth of maybe misspent funds. I don't know. They've just sort of vanished into thin air. And then you look at all these individual contracts that are given out with taxpayer funds that, for whatever reason, there's just not the political motivation to audit them. I think when you have have money that's sent out in the name of social justice or racial justice, there's a hesitancy from Democrats to audit those funds, and that's all political, certainly. And then on the homelessness front, you have all these entities that are getting all this money, 6-figure salaries to work in the homeless industrial complex, and they want to keep that money coming in, and Democrats certainly want to keep giving that money to them. So there's just, again, not the political courage or desire to audit where all your money is going. Yet they continue year after year to come back to us and ask for more money. At some point, we have to say no. We have to tell them to kick rocks until they're willing to be accountable for the money, the vast amounts of money that they're already spending. It's ridiculous. All right, that segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.